Hello, everybody. Happy holidays, Merry Christmas, Happy Hanukkah. It's been a crazy few weeks. We have now the funds from the Kickstarter, and we have been purchasing the materials that we need to generate the molds to get our supply going, and we are super excited to be able to just bring this to life. The boats, the walls, the trees, all of it. It's a huge blessing for us, and we hope that in turn we can help and bring to life adventures on people's tabletops everywhere. With that being said, I'm going to continue to create helpful videos as is necessary, and things that I'm passionate about and things that I think that can really help the community. The tabletop role-playing experience is relatively young. Shared storytelling around the campfire has been around for as long as humans have been around. The tabletop role-playing game experience has only really been active since the 70s, and only recently has picked up an immense amount of traction. In the beginning of Dungeons & Dragons, we know there was a lot of scares that it was a devil worship practice, and there was a stigma that only teenage adolescents with a ton of acne and Coke bottle glasses were the ones who were participating in the fantasy adventure role-playing experience, or any type of tabletop role-playing experience for that matter. It is now abundantly clear that the Dungeons & Dragons and tabletop role-playing experience is more mainstream. It's actually a tool that a lot of improv or actors or comedians use to train those skills that are needed to be able to bring their characters to life on screen and through theater and in their portrayals. With that in mind, there are two different styles that you can play out encounters in tabletop role-playing games. One of those occurs through the form of theater of the mind, and the other occurs through having miniatures on the table. Depending on the style of the dungeon master or game master, one or both of these techniques can be employed to bring the encounters to life for the players. So steering away from my usual player and DM tips, I'm going to break down the two different styles of encounter scenarios. A theater of the mind encounter is exactly what it sounds like. It is a scene that is being acted out in everybody's imagination. A dungeon master needs actors, needs characters for the theater to come to life. And if done right, the players will feel like they are participating as well as the dungeon master in this type of a scenario. A theater of the mind encounter does three things. First, it should describe the setting with as many different senses as possible. When you're walking into a cavern, what are the things that you are seeing or smelling or feeling or tasting or hearing? The more you are able to describe, the greater the suspension of disbelief is when you are walking through those scenarios. You open the door and the door itself creaks slowly as you push it open. You are immediately enveloped with an aroma of the smell of rotted flesh. That sickly sweet savor leaves a thick film in the roof of your mouth. And as the door opens wider, your torchlight illuminates the room in front of you. There, across the room, about 30 feet away, you see pale, glowing eyes. The Dungeon Master can set the scene by describing all of those senses, and you can in turn ask the players what it is they think that they would be experiencing at that time. The second thing that happens in Theater of the Mind is a clear definition of the battlefield so that the players can really envision everything that is happening around. The room itself opens up, and even though it is about 30 feet across, you see that it goes and spans about 10 feet off in either direction. Apart from that narrow corridor, there are bookshelves, there are stools that have been knocked over, there are several barrels that have fallen over and their contents have spilled out onto the floor. The third thing that should happen in Theater of the Mind is to involve the players so that they can describe their attacks and their actions. This helps with the pace of the encounter. Okay, Vitruvius, what is it you would like to do?
Well, I pull out my spellbook and I open up to page 142, which of course is Fireball. I summon forth a ball of fire in my hand, bringing it to life while muttering arcane symbols, and throw it across the room, and immediately the other side of the room erupts in flame.
Oh, well, thank you, Vitruvius. The scenario for Theater of the Mind, it could be really fast-paced. It's something that can really help keep the game moving along quickly, but also engage the players so that they're really bringing this whole thing to life. There are benefits, there are shortcomings to having theater of the mind and for running it. The benefits for me is that the scene is described in a way that it could be very memorable for the players if it's done right. Also, it works really well with large groups. So if you have a large scale battle with multiple opponents and the heroes and they're fighting, then theater of the mind moves really quick and everybody can declare their actions and have everything happen very quickly. And the rolling itself feels more natural as well. So because of those reasons, it really helps to speed up those encounters. The shortcomings, you are forced to visualize everything, and everyone's imagination is completely different. So what the Dungeon Master might be describing can be interpreted completely different from what somebody else in the other side of the table is thinking what the room looks like. For that reason, it's vital that Dungeon Masters provide as many details as possible so that the players know what their options are. Without good details, the scene can seem sloppy and disorganized. It can seem like it's not a fully put together scenario. And the things that we have discussed help to mitigate those scenarios from turning into a negative experience. For miniatures, you get to use the strategy that is afforded you from being able to look at the battlefield from bird's eye view. Miniatures also offer a player or dungeon master to have a personal touch with your character. There are a plethora of sites out there that allow you to customize and create your own miniature. There are incredible artists out there who are willing to do this for you if you lack the artistic touch, but it could also bring to life a true villain onto the field, someone that the players themselves who might have been visualizing in their head finally see it manifested before them and are able to see it and want to just destroy it. The last thing that I would say that miniatures bring to the table, they give the players the opportunity to invent new ideas to use the terrain to their advantage. When you have miniatures on the field and you have the battle map in display or terrain on there, it's really easy for the players to think, I could go up on that cliff, lie down, and shoot down on the enemy. Or, the ceiling of this cavern is made of rock. I'm going to use shatter on the ceiling. A brilliant strategy. And you can maintain rule restrictions for line of sight, for spell casting. Whereas with Theater of the Mind, it's a little bit more difficult to manage movement speed and all of those things. And those mechanics are important for Dungeons & Dragons to work. However, if you prefer that more fast and loose version of Dungeons & Dragons, then those things can slow the game down where you might not mechanically want that to happen. The shortcomings of miniatures, that by having a tactile representation of their character or of the monsters, you are forcing a limitation on everyone's imagination. For me, some of the greatest horror films are those that don't actually show all of the gore, all of the horror. They are things that happen off screen that you can hear or that is implied, because then my imagination works to fill in those blanks. And that is the beauty of Theater of the Mind that can be lost if done in miniature format. Another shortcoming that can happen is rule lawyering can occur. By having all of these different representations on the field, someone who's more talented at knowing what the different rules are can point out what characters are doing wrong, and that can be annoying and it can slow the game down. Another thing is that if you have large-scale battles with multiple miniatures on the board, it can feel long and dragged out if it's not done in the correct way. Especially if characters are having trouble remembering what their spells do, etc. The last shortcoming of having miniatures on the board is that metagaming can occur. If the entire dungeon is built out in front of you, it's going to be difficult for the players who are controlling their characters to not know, oh, up ahead there are 3 turns, there are 4 doors, when their characters have never been to this place before. So miniatures can take away from that feeling of apprehension and of exploring a dungeon. Me personally, as a dungeon master, I like to employ both when the scenario calls for it. I use Theater of the Mind, and I use miniatures. I like being able to use miniatures a lot because I have a lot of players who are strategists at the table, so that is something that is fun for them to do in the encounter. They like being able to hold a hallway when they know that there are hordes of zombies or something coming through, so that they are limited on how many opponents they have to fight at a time. And it's brilliant. It's good for the players to be able to strategize. But there are certain scenarios, like I have mentioned, where you have just too much going on, or you want this encounter to wrap up quickly. In those scenarios, I think Theater of the Mind is a great tool to use. Either way, I hope you enjoyed this video. I hope it was informative. I hope it was helpful. And if you liked the video, please subscribe. Let me know if there's anything that you would like to see in the future, or if there are any tips or techniques that you would like to hear that I can go over for you. And with that in mind, let's get out there and remember, gaming is life.